Good morning, Dennis. Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning.
How are you?
Oh, so.
So.
I was on a Zoom call last night. This had chat rooms. I'd never seen that feature before.
Yeah, you can do breakout rooms.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
It's interesting. You can't do that with the webinar product, which is what I use for
really?
these Zooms. It's only with the regular meeting product that you can do that. Which is,
because
I guess the webinar is really meant to be mostly one way. You know, you have presenters speaking to an audience.
Yeah, I think so.
I just break the rules by making everyone a panelist.
So Dennis, what's happening? Is Seattle breaking away from the nation or what?
Oh yeah, I guess we're afraid. I'm just afraid Trump's going to nuke us. I don't know.
He'll nuke California before he nukes Washington.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I've just been kind of ignoring it. Apparently, some people, they abandoned a police station a couple weeks ago. Now it's occupied by the protesters, and apparently there's no police activity in the area. So I'm not quite sure how they're governing themselves, but I think they're just kind of waiting for them to get bored with it and just go home.
Either that or they're like, let them all kill each other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty easy area to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a fringe. It's kind of a fringe area anyway. These people who live there are kind of kooky. So.
Gotcha.
Ready?
All right, I'm just letting people in for now. We'll get started in a couple minutes. Meanwhile. Start going live on Facebook. Quiet morning this morning. All right, we should be live in just a few seconds. Uncle Sam.
Right.
I knew that was going to be Matthew. All right, I think we may officially be live on Facebook. Let me go check. Hey, that looks like you.
Oh, what do you mean, man? What do you mean? I don't understand.
Yeah, it looks like we are officially live. Good morning. Happy Friday. It's June 19th, 2020. Can you believe the year is more than halfway over?
Yikes.
Right? Oh my gosh.
It's only been half a year.
We've been doing taxes for that long too.
It feels like it's been 10 years, right?
Yeah, okay.
Hey, anyway, let me just quickly share this live feed. I don't normally post these to my personal Facebook account, but I figure why not?
I always go to my personal one because I can share it easier then. Since making the group private, it's really hard to share out of the group.
Well, that's why I share to the page.
Yeah, it's true.
For the same reason, because then it makes it sort of the official sort of root of the post is on my Facebook page, and then I share to the group. And now I'm just pasting the link to share to my personal feed.
But that wouldn't be fair to Linda all the time if I always did it to my business page.
So we'll see
Linda.
if we'll see if some of my random high school friends join just to see what this craziness is that I'm up to in my adult life. So,
scroll back then.
what? Put the squirrel back? Yeah. That was actually really funny.
Well, it's AR today, right? I mean, for it was important.
Okay, somebody help me understand something. What the F is Juneteenth? What does that mean?
It's when the slaves were notified officially back in 1865 that they'd been freed by Congress. And then it was like 2 years since the Emancipation Proclamation.
Okay.
I'm a history major and I'd never heard of it before.
But what is that? Why Juneteenth? That like sounds like something a teenager came up with for some special day in June. Like Juneteenth, like the 19th.
It was like the 19th. I don't know where they came up with Juneteenth.
It's for Texas. I never knew that it was famous everywhere else. It's just for Texas. I thought it was just for Texas. It's when some general or other, I forgot his name, he sailed to Galveston Harbor and let the slaves know. Apparently it was 2 years after the proclamation. But anyway, because of the lack of communication, the slaves didn't know that they were free, and that's the day that they actually heard about it.
Okay, that I get. I just don't understand where the name itself comes from. I don't understand how that applies, but who am I to say? It's just, it sounds like a really weird name, like Juneteenth. I don't know, just because all of a sudden I've been seeing that everywhere. And somebody told me earlier this week, like, oh, a lot of people might be kind of taking Friday off because it's Juneteenth. And I'm like, what the F is Juneteenth? I've never heard of this.
I'd never heard of it before.
Well, it's June 19th, and it was just shortened to Juneteenth.
Yeah, I think
yeah, that's what I.
Being sort of Southern, I never questioned it. It makes perfect sense to me.
I don't know. I think we could do better. I think we, Matthew, I'm tasking you with coming up with a much better name to explain so that when I see the name, I understand exactly what it's referring to.
I decline that task. But
we can call it like Proclamation Day. I don't like, I can do so much better off the top of my head in 30 seconds.
But I look at it this way. I'm actually glad that we are now all aware of it, because I was not aware either. So.
Me too. Well, you know what I've learned? A lot of times we hear these things, especially terms get thrown around the internet, and we don't know what they mean, and we're too like embarrassed to ask, right? Because we're like afraid that somebody's going to jump down our throats and say, well, you should know this, because somebody somewhere probably will. But my response to that is, F you, I'd rather ask and then learn and become informed than sit around and be ignorant and not know what the heck it means, right? Now, I could have Googled it. I've Googled a lot of things in the past on that basis where I've said, okay, I don't want to seem like the dumb one who's asking, you know, like at one point I had to look up what the hell FOMO meant. And I thought Juneteenth was like another FOMO kind of thing, like something that the kids understand that we don't as adults. You know, and so if you don't know what FOMO means, before you Google it, I'll save you the trouble. It stands for fear of missing out.
Oh, yeah.
So there. But you can usually Google these things. Somebody in one of my Slack workspaces earlier this week wanted to know what the CDTFA stood for. And so I went to the Let Me Google That For You webpage and put it in. And does everybody know about Let Me Google
California
That For
Department of
You?
Transportation and Fee Administrations.
Moment of emancipation in Texas, where more than 250,000 enslaved black people received news on June 19th, 1865. Celebrations of Juneteenth, which combines the word June with 19th, began in 1866, a year and a day after Granger's announcement. Black men, women, and children dressed in their
Yes.
finest attire gathered to sing spirituals, pray, play baseball, and eat. Good. I'm actually very glad that we got informed about what that means.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew.
That wasn't me.
Well, oh, Annette. Thank you, Annette. You started talking when it dropped in the chat.
You're welcome.
You started talking, Matthew, when Annette dropped it in, and I didn't. The names get cut off in the chat sometimes if I don't have it like fully expanded. I'm glad you can now resize that too, because you didn't used to be able to. Now I can see, and now I can see that apparently Jennifer is feeding her baby. She missed the whole Juneteenth thing. Now she's not going to know. Anyway, right down to business today. Right down to business. Actually, it's a little late for that, but now we're going to get down to business. We're going to talk about accounts receivable and Excel.
Ooh.
And this is coming from something I did for a client. Actually, I'd done it on the payables side, so just keep that in mind as I go through this, that you can do the exact same thing with a payables aging report. And before I dig any further into this, let me just for the sake of people who may not be in the know, how I got this report into Excel. I'll go into the test drive company for QuickBooks Online, and this is a great way to, by the way, to play around. There's people still who don't know that this exists. I've had people in Slack recently asking, or not in Slack, on my YouTube channel, somebody posted the comment saying, I can't figure out how to get like a sample QuickBooks Online company. So just Google QBO test drive and you'll find it, and then go away. And so it actually, I guess, remembered from earlier this morning when I was running it. But go to reports, and if you go down to who owes you, then you run the accounts receivable aging detail. You don't want the summary, you want the detail, because the detail has each individual invoice and the information that you want to have about that invoice. Click over here, export to Excel. If you happen to be in QuickBooks Online Advanced, you can export straight to Google Sheets. Right, so that's how we get the report and run it, and then it lands in Excel and it looks exactly like this, right?
Hey, Seth, real quickly. See, Excel is better. You don't have to pay more to use it.
What? I couldn't hear you. You were breaking up.
Never mind.
Anyway, next step is to make a copy. I always like to preserve the original tab. So Control, click, drag. Right, so I held down the Control key, clicked on the tab, drag to the right. It makes an exact duplicate of the tab. And I'll just rename this and call it data, because I just want to clean this. So I'm going to highlight the whole spreadsheet, just click between the A and the 1. That little sort of cornerstone is what I like to call it. And notice I can unmerge anything that's merged. I usually just bang the wrap text twice, once to wrap everything, and again to make sure everything's unwrapped, because that just kind of gets in the way. Actually, don't need these headers. I don't need these distinctions, right? The aging. I really just want the data. So now I'm going to highlight everything down to the bottom here. Control T, like table. Make sure you check off here where it says my table has headers. It doesn't necessarily assume that, because you have sort of inconsistency in the data right now because you have subtotals, right? So make sure that's checked off. Once I'm in a table, in 2 seconds, I can sort it by date here under the data tab. And then I can get rid of all this extra data that I don't need. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to clean the date data. And we want to clean the date and the due date. Okay, and I sort of got myself sidetracked. Where this is coming from is a client had asked me a while back on the payables side that he wanted to be able to see what was in the aging but laid out on a timeline, so they could see exactly when things were due. And obviously the same applies to either receivables or payables aging, right? So that's ultimately what we're going to do here, and then I'm going to show you how we can create some interesting charts with it. So first we want to make sure this is formatted by date. Notice it doesn't change when I select my date convention, because when we export data from a database in Excel, it often is being read as text, even though it looks like it's taken on the form of a date. It isn't truly a date yet. So backing up, what I do is I'll select the whole range, not including the header itself, and we go data and text to columns. Okay, the keyboard shortcut is Alt D and E. Alt D is in data, E is in Excel. And we'll do fixed width next, and I can click anywhere out here. The only purpose of this is just to get Excel to start recognizing this as a date range. And I click next, and then the right hand side, we're going to say do not import and finish. And now you can see now it's taken on the formatting that I had applied. And we need to do the same thing on the due date. So Alt DE for text to columns, fixed, next, click anywhere out there, next, do not import, finish, right? The second time I did it super fast, and this time I hadn't yet applied the formatting I wanted, so I'll do that now. Control and the number 1 brings up this dialog. And I know I'm going kind of fast. A, I've demonstrated this 1,000 times before, but B, you can watch the replay and rewind it and rewatch it. So
Seth,
the
as you
date.
go on real quick, can I just say one other option is you do the formatting. If you basically highlight all the same cells, if you can multiply them by 1 or add 0. And what we're doing in both scenarios is you're trying to take text, turn it away from text to a general mode to where you can then make it into a date is the whole point of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. All right, so now we're ready to rock and roll, because the trick is when I apply the date formatting that I want, I should see the data actually render accordingly. And if it doesn't, that's because Excel is seeing it as text, right? So now I can, I just quickly highlighted the whole thing, and you double click between any two columns just to kind of auto size the columns to fit whatever the data is. And probably a good idea now to hit Control S to save it. But now I have my data and I'm ready to go. So we're going to go to table design.
Steph, do you have any wise words for if a date, like if it's not 05, that it's actually May, like MAY, on how to split it to columns too?
If it's in an alpha form, no, you just have to. What I do with something like that is I just change it to an actual date. But you can't convert text to a date like that. What sometimes, so a lot of reports in QuickBooks, it will just have those alpha-based date kind of headers. So what I do in those cases, and I teach this when I teach like my cash flow projections process. So you're talking about I have like January of 2019, just kind of laid out like that. Although when I typed that, Excel read that as January 19th, 2020. So let's try that again, right? Single quote, by the way, tells Excel just read this as text no matter what I put. So you're talking about something like this, where I have January 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And not really working the way I hope. So no, there's no way to fix that. So if I'm doing that in a timeline based on like a monthly totaled P&L, let's say, you're going to get something like that. It's not going to be an actual date. It's going to be just a text rendering of that month and year. So I literally will just go 1/1/19. Okay, and notice that converted to a date. Sometimes it won't convert to a date, so same process, you'll have to make sure it's being read properly as a date. And then if you want, there's 2 ways to get the timeline done on something like this. I can go 2/1/19 because I want February next, and then let's just say 3/1. So going out at least 3 is a pretty safe bet. Then if I highlight all 3 cells and I use my autofill, it will recognize the pattern so I can quickly get the rest of the year out on a timeline. So you need at least 3 is sort of a guarantee it'll recognize the pattern. It might have worked with 1 or 2. The other way, which is a little more dynamic so that I can copy and paste this out as far as I ever need to go, is there's a formula called EDate. And so I do equals EDate, point to the starting date, comma, and then I just tell it the number of months I want to increment by. So assuming it's monthly, then I just use 1. If it was quarterly, I would use 3. Close parentheses, enter. Now I have to get it formatted like a date. So control and the number 1, date. Okay, and now I can copy and paste. I don't have to worry about autofill even. And that will forever work and keep taking me out into the future. So those are a couple of other ways to, get dates sorted out on a timeline.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. So now what we want to do with this is I want to go to my table design, right? And just bear in mind, I've watched people get tripped up on this. If you have a cell selected that's outside of the table, you won't see the table tab up there. So when you've established the table, you have to have clicked somewhere in the table for this to appear. So because I teach Excel at Santa Monica College here, and I've watched people like get tripped up looking for that table design tab, and then they get mad at me thinking I stole it from them. I didn't, because they didn't click on the table. So table design, summarize with pivot table, and I'll click OK. It recognizes that it's the table range that I probably want. And let's start by dropping we want the open balance in the values. And I'm going to format those as numbers. Okay, and then what I want is I want the due date in my timeline. And while we're at it, might as well drop the customers in the rows, right? And because I took the time to format the dates well, Excel recognized that. So it's got them grouped by month, which we can expand. And I'll close up my pivot table field so we can see the whole thing at once. But now you have a very nicely laid out timeline that shows, based on the due date at least, when we can or should expect to collect all this money. And for that matter, what's past due, right? Everything through, we're at the 19th. So everything through here is past due. All right, so that's one use case. And let me also bring up my chat just to see. I wasn't looking at the chat.
You're good so far.
Okay, thank you. So this right here is a very useful report. You can't get something like this directly out of QuickBooks, right? That was my client's sort of concern, is he wanted to be able to see it this way. And there's no report in QuickBooks that really does this. You have aging reports, which will group it in buckets based on, 30 to 60, 60 to 90, and so on. But nothing that's quite this specific and based on due date. You can get something like this based on the invoice date, but not the due date. So it was interesting when he first laid it out to me. It took a couple of back and forth, iterations before I fully understood what he wanted. Because at first I was like, no, you can get that in QuickBooks. But ultimately I realized what he meant was, in QuickBooks I can run a report that's going to be driven by the invoice date, and get it laid out kind of like this, because you can total it by day in QuickBooks Online, but you couldn't total it by due date in QuickBooks Online. That's not, if we go into a QBO report, I guess I closed the tab. Never mind. Take my word for it. You can't do this in QuickBooks Online based on the due date. So now the other thing I wanted to show, and this is going to be a short one this week, is if I go over here into insert, okay, and let's go back to the source data, and I'll move that tab back over. And I'm in the insert tab. We can go to pivot chart, and we can start doing some interesting things here. So I'll add in a pivot chart. Okay, and then we want the open balance in the values. Again, let's format that. And you can already see it start to take shape. Okay, let's get the customer in the axis here. And the moral of the story that I want you to take away from this is play with this stuff, right? Don't accept just what Excel kind of does for you by default. You want to start understanding what's the difference if I have the customer in the axis versus, for example, if I put the customer in the legend, right? The data gets a little more interesting, I think, when I put the customer in the legend, because now each customer is represented in their own bar in the bar chart, and I can see what their AR is, so I can see very quickly that this one stands out. Okay, and then looking at the colors, it looks like this is Cookies by Kathy.
That's huge. That's going to make people want to like ask questions.
Mm-hmm. And then let's take this a little further. While I've got the chart selected, again, it's contextual, these menus at the top. So whatever's selected, if it applies, there's going to be some additional things here. Like here's the pivot chart analyze option, right? But I can go to design and I can, first of all, just within that, I can change the template. Just again, make it look prettier, right? You can also move this to its own sheet. It doesn't have to be on the same sheet as the data necessarily. And that will give you some more real estate to work with. And then of course you can do all kinds of things. You can save this out as a PDF and send it to your client, or just send the Excel file, or there's a lot that you can do with this. But just visually, Excel makes it ridiculously easy to make this look nice. See, now I can start seeing in this format, it shows me the actual values, right? And actually, now that I hover my mouse over it, it shows me the series is actually Paulson Medical Supplies, not Cookies by Kathy. The colors were sort of similar, right? So moving my mouse over it gives me that little help label that says Paulson Medical Supplies. And if we play around with this, no doubt we could get the customer to show up here too, or get the customer to show up on the bottom. These are very customizable, right? Another thing is we can change the chart type. So if I go to, I'm in the design tab already. If I go here to where it says change chart type, even within the column charts, I can get some interesting data. Like if I click on this format, it gets a little busier, but now I can see the customers, right? I can expand this to make it a little easier to see what's going on here. But again, it's the same data, but this just looks cool. This catches my eye. This makes me go, oh, that looks cool. What am I looking at here, right?
In terms of like cash flow, can you sort this chart to do it by the like date and the amount owed, like lowest to highest?
You could, so going back to the data here, yeah, you can organize this all different kinds of ways. But yeah, you could sort this, I could sort this by grand total by simply going into the pivot table and under data, just clicking the sort option. So boom, I can quickly see Paulson is the one who owes us the most money.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Okay, and again, just playing around with different kinds of charts. And back to design. So this is the same basic chart type, but just these are different formatting options that Excel gives you by default that you can play around with, right?
So Jennifer, with what you were talking about, one of the things you could possibly do is if you added a formula at the main table that actually had the days outstanding on it that was counting up, you could then add that in as a value and then have your sort highest to lowest, which would then make your most outstanding show up first.
Yeah, so here, I'll show you exactly how I do that. So if I add a column here in the source data called days, all I have to do is I want to do it as of today, right? So equals today, open and close parentheses, minus the original date, right? Not the due date, but the original date. If I want to see how many days old this actually is, it took that as a date format. But if we change that by simply updating the formatting, we can see very clearly
that's cool.
The days. And now I can easily add this in. So if I go to my pivot table,
I love pivot tables.
They're really a lot of fun. I just have to click here on refresh. So I've selected the pivot table. I clicked field list to bring it back because I had closed it before, so it wasn't there. And under pivot table analyze, I'll click refresh. And now that days field is in there, right? So what I could do is let's take the due date out altogether. And I can put days in the columns. So now I can quickly see this is what's 95 days old. Now that's of course going to crash my my pivot chart if I refresh it because I changed the source data. No, I didn't change the source data. I'm sorry. I changed the pivot table. I'm sorry. This will be fine. right? But now we can also do, let's do a new chart. Let's go back to the data. Let's insert a pivot chart. We'll go here. For the values, I want days. Okay, let's go to design. For the chart type, let's do a pie chart. Okay, and then we want by customer. Let's put that here. And boom, so now, I don't know how helpful this is because there's just a lot of different sort of colors there, but you can start to get a sense of it. And you can also filter this by customer. So this little customer, it's a drop down. It's hard to see, it's subtle, but there's a little arrow there that tells you it's a drop down. So I can select, and I can even do value filters, right? And I can say the top 10, which when I click that, I can actually change it. Give me the top 3. So now I've got the 3 customers with the oldest AR.
Yeah, I was going to say there should be a way to actually even add the percentage value just right on there visually if you wanted to see it that way. That's awesome. So you know who to go hunting first.
Yep. Yep. So you see here's the top 3. And again, if we want to start doing advisory services and putting dashboards together, and especially if we have a client who's very sort of AR intensive, you know, where AR is a big, you know, is a big number, and that's a major lever we want to pull to try and improve cash flow, then, and this is what I've been teaching a lot of as I've just launched my Bulletproof CFO program. I've been telling people, you know, before you go crazy putting a whole dashboard together, we have to define what are the objectives we have for that client, what's important, right? Because if we just splash it might be a beautiful dashboard filled with lots of pretty colors, but it's going to be useless if we haven't designed it with an eye towards what the objectives are with that client, right? And the same goes for what we're doing here. This is beautiful if I have a client who's got a lot of accounts receivable, and especially if the nature of their business is such that it takes a while to collect, you know, this is the kind of stuff then that we want to do, because then we need to have somebody internally at the company who's going to take this data and take action on it, which is going to mean, okay, let's start with the top 3 customers here and let's call these guys. And let's see if we can't get them to pay a little sooner in general, but also right now, let's get them to pay what they owe, right?
So
and this is how we can help better manage cash flow by focusing on the oldest clients or the ones with the largest balances that are also a little older.
I don't know if you were gonna show this part of it, but I'm sure one of the questions people are asking is, this is cool, but I don't want to have to go through all these steps every single month. So how do I take and set this up the way I want, but then maybe run new reports and have it update? Is there a good way to do that?
So my answer to that, and I don't know if you would have a different answer, Matthew, so if you do, by all means, chime in. But my answer to this would be, you know, each month or however often you want to update the analysis, because yeah, this is going to change. We're going to collect some and we're going to invoice new people. I would basically update this AR aging detail, clean it up, and then just dump the updated data into this data tab. As soon as I do that, I click refresh and everything's up to date.
That's exactly what I do. The only change I would do, which I'm sure you would agree with right away, is I would actually save a specific report in QuickBooks Online without the headers, with basically create that flat file template. So that way you can literally just kind of export it, copy, paste it, and it would actually be refreshing. You're done.
Right. And the beautiful thing about the table, by the way, is I can paste in right here on the next available blank line. Or bottom line, if I paste from here because I've got a whole new report, it is going to expand the table. And all the charts and pivot tables are based on the table and not just the range, which means, again, it's dynamic. The minute I paste the updated report into here, once it's been cleaned up, it will run. You know, the other thing is we still have to clean up the dates each time, which is a little annoying, but nothing we can do to avoid that I know of.
Tell Intuit, please have your export show up the dates correctly.
I don't know if it's something Intuit can control, because every database I've ever exported from to Excel has had this issue.
I wonder if it's a default setting. I never thought about looking there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just QuickBooks. It's anything I've ever exported from I've almost always had to update any kind of numeric format to get it to recognize. Actually, no, it's more so with dates. Regular numbers, it will acknowledge as numbers, but for some reason, dates, I guess, is just somehow a unique kind of format. And every sort of target database, in this case, it being Excel, might have a different way of rendering dates. I've actually run into this with Zapier, where I have a Zap that when somebody schedules an appointment with me, it adds a record in an Airtable base where I keep track of all my sessions for each client who has live support plans or one-on-one with me. And the date won't render in Airtable's date format. They just don't talk to each other properly. So I haven't gotten around to it yet, but one of these days I'm going to create a step in Zapier that parses the date the way it comes in from schedule once and then reconstructs it in a way that Airtable can read to save myself the trouble. But now when those records come in, I have to manually assign the date. What I've done is I've had it drop the date into the memo, so then I can see what the date is very quickly and update the actual date column. So there's definitely something with dates, Matthew, that gives databases trouble because I guess they have different ways of looking at the date.
Yeah, like, so what's happening with your other scenario is it's UTC, Universal Time Code, and that'll actually have the hours and minutes, everything else on it. So if you use like Zapier Formatter, it will change the format over to whatever you want and as part of the Zap over. And I mean, because if you have Canadian dates versus US dates, totally different. So that, I think that's part of it is there's so many variations that they don't know how to transition it.
Yeah, because in Canada, it's like, hey, it's June 19th, eh?
Tiffany, where are you?
Yeah, where's Tiffany when we need her?
Love it.
Anyway, so that, you know, what I really want to do, what I want everybody to do here for your homework is go to the QBO test drive company, dump their aging. A, make sure you can reproduce what I've done here. And then B, play with it. You know, if you've got a question like, I think it was Jennifer who asked about the aging, right? You know, see if you can't figure out how to get this repurposed to give you the data that you want, because that's what this is about at the end of the day. You know, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. No, a while back, I remember a client was in town from New York and it was like very last minute. He's like, hey, I'm here. I know it's last minute. Do you have time? And it was like a Sunday. He had a few hours to kill before he had to head to the airport to head back home. So I met with him for breakfast, and we were talking, and he was an e-commerce client, and we had a really interesting conversation that I think of whenever I think of looking at this kind of stuff, which is data. And that was the key message he had for me when we talked over breakfast that morning. Was he's like, I need data, you know, and basically he was sort of pleading with me, like, please get me data. I need to understand, you know, how to look at these numbers in a way that I can make really intelligent and useful decisions, because especially in the e-commerce world, especially as an Amazon seller, he really has to stay 3 steps ahead. He can't wait till the end of the month to figure out what's going on. He needs to know today. He needs to know right now, and especially as an Amazon seller, because guess what? Amazon competes with its own sellers on its own platform. And so he really needs to be able to see data to see if his top selling item is something that Amazon is now producing, because that's what Amazon does. They analyze data and they say, hey, these products are doing really well, so we're gonna sell them through our Amazon Basics brand, right? Because why not? Because we can make more money on it that way by you know, crushing our sellers on our own platform, right? That's my little rant. But anyway, the point being, he recognized that he was in this situation. He recognized that he's in a world that can be extremely cutthroat. And so he needs to be 3 steps ahead of the curve, which means he needs data. And this is the kind of stuff we can do. It starts with some reports in QuickBooks, but oftentimes we need to take it beyond QuickBooks and really cut up the data so that a client like that, you know, like that client of mine, can really get the visual. So in his case, it wasn't so much AR, it was more about product data, what was selling, right? And we needed to understand profit margins. I've started to play around with a new e-commerce tool actually called Margin Driver, and I'm using it with one client now because they're actually able to give us profitability by item, by order. So every time something sells, we are able to analyze how profitable that order was. So if he ran a promotion and sold it for a little less, or if his cost of goods sold is creeping up somehow, we'll be able to see that, you know, very, very quickly. So we can see it, and we can even filter the data by any orders that whose profits came in under a set threshold. So I'm looking at the chat. I work with contractors. Is it possible to get a similar aging report by project under the heading of each customer? So are we talking about using actual projects or using sub-customers as jobs? I guess that's the only question I have. I don't know. Matthew, you know projects very well. Can we get an aging for a project or by project?
You could. So one of the questions actually I was wanting to ask everybody is, what reports are you commonly running from QuickBooks into Excel? Like, I'd love to hear from everybody, what are you making, so we can see if there's ways that you could, improve it. You can, of course, if you want to see them all in one report, you would export a, P&L by customer, and then you could clean that up in Excel. And what I mean by that is, if you have the customer as well as the projects are the same thing as like a sub-customer, you end up getting that like total line for each one of them. So you have to choose what you want to see or not. Otherwise, it gets really, really long and ugly through the QuickBooks reporting. But it could be done. And then if you have it really from there, it's just kind of a data table that you can kind of do what you want with it. So yes, it could be done.
Yeah, so it sounds like, if I understood correctly, Matthew, what I could do is get a report that when exported to Excel, I'd have a column with the customer and a column with the project.
Yep.
Right, and then I can use a concat formula to combine those, so I can report on it that way, right?
Correct. And so you'd have each row would be a different value of your P&L in a sense. So you've got a very beautiful data table that if you just took the headers away, you could turn the whole thing into a big data table with different columns for each one of the different customers. And then you could take and turn that into a graph if you wanted to, now that I think about it. So there's definitely some cool things. The question would be, though, the purpose of projects, if we're talking QuickBooks Online, is to be able to make it to where you can click into it and go to a profit and loss and see it very quickly. But you see them one at a time that way.
Yeah, but I think what he's getting at is, if he has projects that he's using for a contractor, and he has, obviously contractors are going to be very AR intensive, I think he would love to be able to see something like what we just demonstrated for that contractor. So because the ultimate goal here, especially in looking at it by due date, is to try and do better cash flow planning.
Yeah, you know what? I actually was completely missing the point there, forgetting the AR side of it. And
no, that's okay.
Projects, actually, you're right. You would need to do it externally because it doesn't really show you easily the outstanding. There is not an AR report for projects directly.
Yeah. In fact, one thing you can do once you get that kind of a layout done is you can be proactive. And I've had this done to me by companies, and depending on how they approach it, it can either be off-putting or it can be refreshing. But where maybe a week before it's due, I'll get a reminder saying, hey, by the way, just reminding you that your invoice such and such is due in a week, right? And ultimately, I don't find it off-putting because I understand it. I understand that they're trying to help me to remember to pay them on time because they're trying to keep their cash flow going, and I can only respect that. I can't get mad at them for doing that. If anything, I should look at that and say, you know what, if I had receivables myself, I could take a page out of their book and look at that and say, you know what, I should be doing this for my own company, not getting mad at them. Just like years ago, one of the reasons I killed off my receivables and started getting paid up front was because somebody did that to me. Somebody insisted on me paying them up front. And I gave him some pushback and I said, hey, can you send me an invoice like this? And he basically told me point blank, he says, no, because I don't want to spend time chasing people to collect money. I want to spend all of my time helping people with what I do. And I thought about it for a second and I said, you know what, I can't help but respect that. And that planted the seed for, I don't know, maybe like a year or so later, for when I said, you know what, I'm going to do what that guy did, because I got tired of chasing people for money. Some businesses you can't really do that in construction. You legally can't do that in construction at the beginning because you can't really invoice them more than about 10% before you've broken ground. Exactly. So then you can start invoicing them. But, to the extent that you can do that kind of thing, you should do that kind of thing. And certainly sending somebody a reminder a week before their invoice is due. If anybody gets mad at you for doing that, you probably want to start working on phasing them out as a customer, because they don't respect you. They don't respect that you deserve to get paid.
I mean, if they always pay on time, I'd be willing to turn that off. But if they don't, I'd be more than happy to remind them there's a reason we're doing it.
Yep. And if in QBO Advanced, you can create a custom field with a drop down where you can kind of toggle who gets that kind of reminder and who you don't need it for.
And you can do workflows where it can automatically send those for you so you don't have to do it. And you can send it beforehand and afterwards. It says, hey, dum-dum, pay me.
Yep. And Linda in the Facebook live feed says, I learned the get paid first trick from Seth David. Yes. Mission accomplished. And I, I've learned this myself from talking with my good friend Mike Milan quite a bit, where when you look at cash flow, and he's the cash flow king, right? There are levers we can pull. One big lever is accounts receivable turnover, right? We can improve the turnover. That's usually the easiest lever to pull. It's the one we have the most control over, if anything, right? The other one is inventory turnover, a little less control. To make that happen, we probably need some marketing dollars spent to help shorten the sales cycle and get more of it sold faster. And then the other one we can pull is the AP lever, but that one, there's a careful balance. We don't want to piss our vendors off by paying them slower, right? If anything, that's not really a lever we want to pull to improve our own cash flow because it's at the expense of someone else's, and that ruins the relationship. And so if anything, go ahead, Matthew.
I actually, I agree with what you're saying, but I think the easiest one we can control is the accounts payable.
Well, yes.
We don't always have control in the accounts receivable.
Fair enough. But my point is payable, while we have all the control, we don't want to exercise that control because, again, we're going to upset the relationship with our vendors, right? Yeah. So that's the reason for sort of excluding that. If anything, we want to pay our vendors right away if we can afford to. That keeps the vendors happy, and that will ensure that they give us what we need when we need it, which oftentimes is the case. If I need a quick turnaround on something and I'm not in the habit of paying that vendor quickly, why should they jump and help me, right? So I always want to take really good care of my vendors, and what that always looks like is pay them right away. The minute I get granted, I couldn't always afford to do this, and I understand that we can't always afford to pay all our bills the minute they come in, but as soon as I got to a place where I could, I have vendors that invoice me now. A lot of things are on auto pay these days. I prefer it that way so I don't have to worry about it. But the few that do invoice me, I love when I get an invoice from somebody who's also using QuickBooks Online and who's using QuickBooks Online payments. Because especially if I'm logged in, if not in 2 seconds, I can get logged into my Intuit account, click, boom, it's paid. And the money's in their account like 2 days later. I love that process. It is so clean. It is so efficient. The client gets notified right away that they've been paid by me. So there's no confusion. Not right away. I guess it takes like a day before they get the notification, I've noticed.
One question I have, has anybody ever found a good way to is there a way to automatically apply discounts? Like if your vendor gives you, 2% 15, net 30, to take that 2% discount if you're paying it within the 15 days and actually
I think there used to be a way in desktop, if you had the term set up that way, it would automatically apply the discount when the payment was received, like by that.
They have it online.
I don't know if they do.
Please prove me wrong, somebody, because I
don't know if they do, but the truth is, I don't like even dealing with that because it creates, especially in a world where we're trying to be very efficient and automated, it creates a lot of friction in that I have to stop and think about that. Like, wait a minute. All right, did I get the money in time to apply the discount or didn't I? Granted, if you could automate that, great. But
yeah, but in my prior career when I was in car audio, that was a big part of like the deal. Like,
yeah, that's how you would encourage people to pay on time. Now I just encourage people to pay on time based on the fact that they should just pay me on time.
I mean, on the vendor side, even. So on the vendor side, like we would go here and buy $10,000 of stuff and get an extra 5% off.
Yeah, no, that can add up to a lot of money, sure.
Show me some money.
Sure.
So did anybody who uses what reports? I didn't hear any answers to that. Anybody got any suggestions of reports are usually having to export from QuickBooks to Excel to play with?
I wonder if a lot of people even do that these days or think about it. Because I think a lot of the time we just get in the habit of just running the reports QuickBooks gives us, and we don't think of, that's kind of why I wanted to do this today. Because when my client challenged me with that task, and again, in their case, it was on the payable side, it was a fun little challenge. And I was like, this makes me think there's a lot more useful data we can get if we learn to, and then get in the habit of grabbing the data out of QuickBooks Online, get it into Excel or Google Sheets, and go play. Go see what kind of data. Go ahead, Tracy.
Bad habit of creating it in Excel and not even realizing I can pull it from QBO.
Oh, you're like manually recreating it?
Well, or just because there's certain things that I'm not sure that I can pull out of there. So I just create it and then I keep updating it every week when we have a meeting or whatever.
Right.
And then trying to find the time to go into QBO and see if I could actually pull it. Because it's specific things they're looking for, not always money related, like counting the number of properties or counting, you know, what the percentage of the sales percentage or whatever is for each agent, or, you know.
Interesting. Yeah, so you're talking, just so everybody else understands, we're talking about real estate based clients,
Yes,
right?
sorry. Yes.
So the number of properties is going to be off of a customer list essentially, but we can probably dump that into Excel and make sure that we haven't repeated any properties. So we can dump it into Excel, remove any duplicates if the format is such that it has those, and then we can do a quick count formula. And you can drop that into a table and do a count formula so that anytime you update it, you'll instantly have that count. So something like that.
Can you put like close dates? I haven't seen a place to put dates in there. Can you?
Well, that's QBO Advanced. You can do a custom date-based field.
Yeah,
that's exactly where that would come in.
That's why.
But that's more expensive, though, isn't it?
It's more expensive, but when a company's making the kind of, you know, when the company's over a certain threat, let's put it this way: the idea is the companies that have those needs typically are making enough money that $150 a month for QBO Advanced is very well worth it, especially for the additional data they can get from it, right?
So if you think about, like, I mean, not trying to do sales pitch on it, but it truly, truly is that this much of a difference. 1 hour time, right? Like, let's say you're charging $75 an hour. That's all. For 1 hour of time that you're charging, I guarantee you, if you're using custom fields of different ways, you can save yourself 1 hour of time messing with stuff. Because with these custom fields, the options are endless. I mean, it's amazing what you can do. You can do the dates that you want. You can have drop downs, which is always my favorite. So for sales commissions and such, now you don't have somebody typing the wrong name, Matt as M-A-T versus M-A-T-T versus M-A-T-T-H-E-W.
Yeah.
You can do
the custom fields in QBO Advanced are more powerful than the ones in QuickBooks Desktop Enterprise.
And it's getting closer to API access.
Now they also, I thought I read somewhere something about the fact that we're going to be able to get those custom fields to show up on the expense transactions as well.
They can now.
I haven't seen it myself, so that's why I wasn't sure, but I haven't looked for it yet.
So to real quickly go back, API access is, API is the language that the different software programs talk to each other. And when I'm saying that you'll have API access, that means if we're using third-party tools like SASANT or CData or whatever you want, you can actually push data into those. So with Advanced, once this becomes available, you take an app like LeanLaw, and they have all these special things like matter numbers that have to go in. They could push them into those fields, and now your reporting functionality just went through the roof.
Yeah, or going back to the real estate example, I can take something like Broker Sumo and export data into Excel, map it, and push it into QBO very easily, very quickly. Although Broker Sumo actually integrates directly with QBO, so. But that's for brokers, not property owners and managers, a little different part of real estate. But anyway, point being, I think, and hopefully this sort of lesson today will encourage people to think more about reports that you can run in QuickBooks Online that you can take into Excel and take them further to get the data that you really need. I showed you how to do pivot tables and charts today, which we actually did a full deep dive on pivot tables and charts maybe like a month or two ago, because you can get, you know, look, if our goal is to, I'm actually blown away, to be very honest, now that I've launched the Bulletproof CFO program, and how many people have reflected back to me. The people I've enrolled now have said, nobody else is teaching this stuff. And I'm like, well, crap, I wish I started doing this 2 years ago, but I'm glad I'm doing it now. But the reality is these are examples of exactly because that's the big gaping hole, is we're told go from compliance to advisory, but nobody's telling us exactly how to do that or what that looks like. This is what that looks like. This is where what that looks like is we're getting data and providing it to a client in a manner that's actionable to them. So again, this is why I cringe a little bit when people start asking about all these KPI tools that create these beautiful dashboards. And it's like, wait a minute. Yes, it looks gorgeous, but have you given a minute of thought to what the objectives are? And chances are, no, because these apps are just trying to sell their apps and they're throwing this crap at us. And I'm sorry to put it that way, but this is really how I feel. So if you ask, how do I really feel? Now you know.
Seth,
because
how do you feel?
it's, what?
How do you feel, Seth?
I feel like it's crap, and I feel like crap about it. No, but seriously, it's another example of how we do things backwards, right? We say, oh, I'm going to create this. I had a client reach out to me this week. One of the guys actually enrolled in Bulletproof CFO, and he says, oh, I promised my client dashboards. So I said, great. What are you putting in the dashboard? And have you talked to the client to find what are the objectives? What do we need to focus on, right? As part of my enrollment process for Bulletproof CFO, one of the things I'm going over with people in the strategy call that we're doing is I'm saying, look, we're going to analyze ratios in all these different categories. We have strength ratios, financial strength ratios, rather, management effectiveness, efficiency ratios, and all kinds of things. And then we're going to cast it all aside in favor of 2 key KPIs that I think are most important to look at for every single client. And then we're going to look at the client's objectives and then pull 1 or maybe 2 of those other ratios and look at that. In other words, I'm not going to have a dashboard with 10 different ratios to look at. It's too much. I'm going to have a very simple look at just a few KPIs that we can manage very closely and pay a lot of attention to. And this is where that starts. So if I, like I said at the beginning of the hour, if I have a client where there's a heavy emphasis that needs to be placed on the AR cash flow lever, then I'm going to create KPIs and dashboards that are based on analyzing AR data. Where are the low-hanging fruit within the AR data? Who can we call to collect now to improve cash flow? Sorry, Matthew, I feel like you're like bursting at the seams here trying to say something.
Just one thing about dashboards. If it's not super easy accessible to somebody, usually through their phone, you can build as beautiful of a dashboard as you want in Excel or wherever. If they can't access it when they want it that second, you're wasting your time.
Not only that, but I think the other waste of time is we expect that we're going to create these beautiful dashboards and throw it at our clients and expect that we're done. And it's never going to work that way. I'm not going to stop saying this, that if you're going to create dashboards for clients, then you'd better be prepared and you better be charging accordingly, that you're going to walk through these dashboards with the client every single month and analyze the data together and then come up with some kind of action that can and should be taken based on the analysis of that data. Otherwise, all you're doing is hanging pretty paintings on the digital wall.
Hey, Seth, real quickly, Tracy actually had sent a message. She meant for it to be public, which was, is Bulletproof CEO for CEOs or accountants working with CEO to provide
No, it's Bulletproof CFO, and it's where I train accountants and bookkeepers to go from compliance to advisory and exactly what that looks like. It's sort of the next logical progression from Bulletproof Bookkeeping and QuickBooks Online is the Bulletproof CFO.
Okay.
And then it goes to Bulletproof
Seth. Supposed to come in and do it. It's for people like me who get past the Bulletproof Bookkeeping to come and learn the next steps of
correct.
Provide more reporting and
it's how it's where I'm going to teach you the skills and give you the tools for providing those advisory services to the client. I'm going to show you exactly how to do it and what it looks like. And it's a 6-month program that I've developed, and it's my high ticket offer that's designed to teach you how to build your high ticket offer that you're going to go to your clients with. Right, I'm basically going to teach you how to build a service that's based on you charging $2,500 a month as a CFO to that client.
Okay.
And I have a whole plan for how to sell the services and also teaching you how to do the forecasts and the ratio and variance analyses. And there's a whole layout. So I've been sort of privately inviting people to do calls with me so I can walk them through the process. I sent an email out last week, did a bunch of calls. I've got a bunch of people enrolled already, which was a lot faster than I expected. But like I said, it's because I'm surprised in a good way, of course, how many people have been wanting, apparently, for somebody like me to come along and offer something like this, because everybody's saying that nobody's offering anything like this, teaching you exactly how to go to advisory. And that's what the program's designed to do.
To add to that, one of the things that's a part of that, of course, is Seth is really good at helping you be able to spot the CFO opportunities. Maybe there's a better way to say that, right? But we all know every single business is different. The metrics that an owner is wanting to see, sometimes they want to see the right one, sometimes they don't know, but being able to take a look at that business and what that person needs and help them create the proper, message, the CFO message for them is really important. Seth is really good at that.
Thank you, Matthew. I feel like this is turning into an infomercial. And then in between that is 97 and Up, which many of you are members of. But you know, the CFO program it's a big jump on a lot of levels in terms of what we're doing. So I'm looking at the Facebook feed. Courtney says, I haven't had to lately. The last time I did that, I exported the invoice payment report to calculate the average number of days invoices were being paid.
This is going back to the discounts and terms and such.
Yeah, this is going back to, well, the question was of what kind of reports are you finding that you export to Excel? Now, QuickBooks Desktop was able to show you average days paid. I guess QBO doesn't have that. I haven't really looked for it.
I don't think it does actually. Yeah,
I'm assuming if Courtney had to go to Excel for it, then probably doesn't. But that's a really good use case, you know, to get, because that's a useful piece of data that will help you figure out that toggle we talked about in terms of who needs to get the reminders a week before it's due. Somebody whose average days to pay are higher than, so we set a threshold and we say, here's what's acceptable in terms of average days to pay. Anybody over this number gets toggled for the reminders. And this is what I mean. This is how you analyze data and then create something actionable out of it. You build processes around it, because number one goal, if we have a client who's got AR, is to see how we can get paid faster and faster, right? That's how we're going to improve our own cash flow. And that's a big thing. Companies go out of business because they're profitable, but they're not collecting fast enough.
Show me the money. Yep.
So that's the beauty of this, is we analyze data. So, and then what that does is it cuts down on friction. We don't have to send every client the reminder, because we acknowledge the clients that are good about paying. So we do that analysis. We figure out who's over our acceptable threshold of average days to pay. Anybody who's over that threshold gets that toggle. And this, again, I think speaks really nicely actually to why you would want QuickBooks Online Advanced, because it gives you the infrastructure that enables you to do this analysis and then employ and apply it. So that's important. And thank you, Matthew, for the plug or plugs for the Bulletproof CFO.
The bill's in the mail, no terms.
Linda in the feed comments, I dislike it when someone says, I just mailed you a check. I also find that a big turnoff. I just like when somebody says, I'm like, really? Like it's 2020, you're sending me a check? Like, ew. I get very snobby about it. I don't like, well, especially now, I don't really want to handle a check that somebody else has handled, because I don't know what they're actually sending me along with that check. At least now I can use my mobile app to deposit it, and I don't have to go to the petri dish of an ATM to deposit the check.
Nice. Adios, my
friend. On that note, I think we all have to go. It is 9 o'clock. So we'll call it. We'll see you next week with another exciting topic. You know where to find me if you have any questions or follow-up or suggestions. And I look forward to talking to you and getting them.